Hi children, welcome to the second part of the session. What is democracy? Why democracy? The first part of the chapter we already discussed about what is democracy, the difference between democratic and non-democratic government and the futures of democracy. Today we are going to learn the major concept of why democracy, merits of democracy, arguments against democracy, arguments for democracy, broader meanings of democracy. These are the above concepts we are going to discuss very clearly. Why we need democracy and what are the advantages we are getting benefited in democracy. Democracy is popular and many newly independent nations are becoming democracies. But we should know what are its merits and demerits. Real democracy should be compared with the real forms of other modes of government like monarchy, dictatorship or other. What are the arguments put forward for democracy? Yes, number one, a democratic government is a better government. Why we are saying that democratic government is a better government? Because it is a more accountable form of government. Number two, democracy improves the quality of decision making by consulting various people and institutions. Number three, democracy provides a method to deal with differences and conflicts. In any society where people belong to different regions, speak different languages, practice different religions and have different castes, democracy enhances the dignity of citizens by providing equality, fundamental rights and freedoms. Now we shall listen to certain arguments which will force us to decide that we should not follow democracy. What are those arguments? Let us see the first argument. Leaders change instability. Leaders change continuously in democracy, which may finally lead to instability. When we talk about the leadership changes in democracy, election we have the defeat of the ruling party, which may ultimately result the change of the leadership. The previous government might have planned certain major steps, develop the country or certain particular projects which has to be initiated during that time, but may not be liked by the other coming party into power. So automatically that would lead to dismantling of the previous projects. Here we can say it causes instability in economics also. The second argument is delay in decision making process, delays and consultation. Whether presidential system or the parliamentary system, continuous deliberations happens. Finally, law can be passed by parliament. Democracy is always time taking and it's delaying. Justice delayed is a justice denied. So how can be justified? Democracy, when it is delaying, most of the people justice denying. We can say the example of from 60 years the women reservation bill is not yet passed still. Time delays. Third category is political competition and power play. Leaders who are always in competition with the political parties always wants to achieve political power in their hands. They do not trust each other. If particular government A announces a particular project, the other party which is not in power would always try to criticize the party which is in power. The intention of the party always would ask questions. If one proves it's right and good for the people, the other party always try to prove that this particular idea or policy is not good or wrong. Always involved in political competition. Finally, they want to have a political power. The next argument is based on corruption. Corruption, yes, there may be a corruption, not 100%, at least few. Next is the best interest of the people. The leader may not know what is the best interest of the people. Obviously, It will lead to take any decision which is not at all favor for the people, that is defect for the democracy. Let's recap the arguments against democracy. Number 1, leaders keep changing in democracy, so it leads to instability. Number 2, it's all about political competition and power play. Number 3, many people have to consult in democracy, that leads to delay. Number 4, elected leaders do not know the best interest of the people, so it leads to bad decision. Number 5, it's based on electoral competition, so it leads to corruption. Finally, number 6, ordinary people do not know what is good for them, so they are unable to decide what is good and bad. I hope that you are all very clear in the concept of arguments against democracy. Shall we move to the next, arguments for democracy? Yes, number 1, a democratic government is a better government because it is more accountable form of government. We can take the example of India and China famines in the year of 1958 to 1961. China's famine of 1958 to 1961 was the worst recorded famine in the world history. Nearly 3 crore people died in this famine. During those days, India's economic condition was not much better than China. Yet, India did not have a famine of the kind China had. Economics thinks that this was a result of different government policies in the two countries. The existence of democracy in India made the Indian government respond to food scarcity in a way that the Chinese government did not. They point out that no large-scale famine has ever taken place in an independent and democratic country. If China too had multi-party elections, an opposition party and a press free to criticize the government, then so many people may not have died in the famine. This example brings out one of the reasons why democracy is considered the best form of government. Democracy is better than any other form of government in responding to the needs of the people. A non-democratic government may and can respond to the people's needs, but it all depends on the wishes of the people who rule. A democracy requires that the rulers have to attend to the needs of the people. A democratic government is a better government because it is a more accountable form of government. There is another reason why democracy should lead to a better decision. Yes, democracy is based on consultation and discussion. A democratic decision always involves many persons, discussions and meetings. When a number of people put their heads together, they are able to point out possible mistake in any decision. This takes time. This reduces the chances of rash or irresponsible decisions. Thus, democracy improves the quality of decision making. Next is, this is based on the third argument. Democracy provides a method to deal with the differences and conflicts. In any society, people are bound to have differences of opinions and interest. These differences are particularly sharp in a country like ours, which has an amazing social diversity. People belong to different regions, speak different languages, practice different religions and have different castes. They look at the world very differently and have different preferences. The preferences of one group can clash with those of other groups. Democracy provides the only peaceful solution to this problem. In democracy, no one is a permanent winner, no one is a permanent loser. Different groups can live with one another peacefully. In a diverse country like India, democracy keeps our country together. These three arguments were about the effects of democracy on the quality of government and social life. But the strongest argument for democracy is not about what democracy does to the government. It is about what democracy does to the citizens. Even if democracy does not bring out the better decision and accountable government, it is still better than the other forms of government. Democracy enhances the dignity of citizens. As we discussed above, democracy is based on the principle of political equality, on recognizing that the poorest and the least educated have the same status as the rich and the educated. People are not subjects of a ruler, they are the rulers themselves. Even when they make mistakes, they are responsible for their conduct. Finally, democracy is better than other forms of government because it allows us to correct its own mistakes. As we discussed above, there is no guarantee that mistakes cannot be made in democracy. The advantage in democracy is that such mistakes cannot be hidden for long. There is a space for public discussion on these mistakes. And there is a room for correction. Either the rulers have to change the decision or the ruler can be changed. This cannot happen in a non-democratic country or non-democratic government. Shall we recap the arguments for democracy? Yes, a democratic government is a better government because it is a more accountable form of government. Number 2, democracy improves the quality of decision making. Democracy is better than other forms of government because it allows us to correct its own mistakes. Number 4, democracy provides a method to deal with the differences and conflicts. Finally, democracy enhances the dignity of citizen. The next concept is broader meaning of democracy. The most common form that democracy takes in our times is that of a representative democracy. You have already read about this in the last session of my class. In the countries we call democracy, all the people do not rule. A majority is allowed to take decision on behalf of the people. Even the majority does not rule directly. The majority of people rule through their elected representatives. There are two types of democracy. One is direct democracy and the one is indirect democracy. Direct democracy. It is a political setup where the people themselves make laws and the parliament directly in the functioning of the government. Decisions are taken on the basis of the majority of opinion. It is suitable for the geographically small countries with less population. We can give the example of modern period Switzerland. Next is the representative, that is indirect democracy. In the modern world, most of the countries are following the indirect democracy. It is a system in which the representatives are elected by the people and they act on behalf of the people. They are so sensitive to cater the needs and opinion of the people. Example of India, France, etc. Next we will move why has representative democracy become necessary in the present world. Yes, modern democracies involve such a large number of people that it is physically impossible for them to sit together and take a collective decision. Even if they could, the citizen does not have the time, the desire or the skills to take part in all the decisions. This gives a clear but minimal understanding of democracy. This clarity helps us to distinguish democracies from non-democracies. Sometimes we use the word democracy not to describe any existing government, but to set up an ideal standard that all democracies must aim to become. True democracy will come to this country only when no one goes hungry to bed. In a democracy, every citizen must be able to play equal role in decision making. For this, you don't need just an equal right to vote. Every citizen needs to have equal information, basic education, equal resources and a lot of commitment. If we take this ideal seriously, then no country in the world is a democracy. Democracy enables us to judge an existing democracy and identify its weaknesses. It helps us to distinguish between a minimal democracy and a good democracy. The most common form of democracies in today's world is ruled through people's elected representatives. But if the community is small, there can be other ways of taking democratic decisions. All the people can sit together and take decision directly. This is how Gram Sabha should work in villages. Finally, what is meant by democracy? Yes, overall, practical democracy is more problematic than democracy in theory, but is still sound enough for democracy to be the best form of government. Democracy is important for individual, social and political welfare and is therefore the best form of government. Now we will see the difference between democratic and dictatorship. In democracy, powers lies in hands of people, but under the dictatorship, powers lies in hands of individual. If you take democracy, people has a right to choose the government through election, but in the case of dictatorship, people do not have right to choose the government. Under democracy, people enjoy freedom of speech and impression. But in the case of dictatorship, people do not have any rights to express their thoughts or feelings. In democracy, all citizens is equal in the eyes of law. In the case of dictatorship, there is no equality. In democracy, policies are made for the benefits of the people. But in the case of dictatorship, policies are made for the benefits of an individual. Here I have given a few images of democratic and non-democratic countries. Democratic countries, we can say New Zealand, India, Iceland. The non-democratic countries, Saudi Arabia, China, North Korea. This is the strength and the weaknesses of democracy. The fate of the country depends not just on what the rulers do, but mainly on what we as citizens do. Other forms of government like monarchy, dictatorship or one-party rule do not require all citizens to take part in politics. But democracy depends on active political participation by all the citizens. Still, having an understanding of democracy as an ideal will explain why to value democracy. It enables people to judge an existing democracy and identify their weaknesses. It also helps to distinguish between a minimal democracy and a good democracy. The most common form of democracy in today's world is being ruled through people's elected representatives. However, for a small community, there can be other ways of making democratic decisions. All people can sit together and make decisions directly. This is how the Gram Sabha should work in a village. I already mentioned the point. So now you are very clear about what is meant by democracy, what are the advantages of democracy. You can go through the mind map. I have given all the concepts clearly in the mind map. With that, I conclude today's topic. Thank you, children.